Hello and welcome to this week's Politics Today, and in this programme today we'll be discussing the huge increase in the cost of energy, and as Christians how can we respond, and also what is the truth that lies behind these rising costs in which energy bills are set to increase by 80% come October. So in this programme today I'm joined by Robin Benson, Christian commentator and good friend of mine, as well as my other good friend Alistair Scott, the UK director for Joseph Storehouse. I'll start off with you, Robin. I mean, people are finding it very, very difficult to make ends meet as it is in the current economic climate that we come in. We've just come out of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and now it looks like this autumn and winter we're going straight into another one with energy bills set to increase by 80%. And before deciding what to do for this week's programme, I don't usually read the kind of business section of the Sunday Times, but if I can just show you that up in smoke, and these are some of the frightening figures here. They say 500,000 jobs at risk in hospitality, 1,500% increase in energy bills for some farmers, 10,000 hospitality businesses facing closure, and 1 billion sought by suppliers to help households. And yeah, it's a mess, isn't it?
Yes. I think that's an understatement. And not to be laughed at either. It is an absolute mess. We have lurched from 1 2-year crisis with all the ripple effects that have come from that we're still dealing with, because it's mixed in with the causes behind, some of the causes behind what we're seeing with this ridiculous, absolutely crazy energy price rise. And as you said, Simon, it is going to hit an awful lot of people very, very hard in the coming months. I mean, I've joined the happy band of official pensioners as far as the UK government is concerned. So it's going to be interesting too for someone like me to see how, you know, the next 6 months through the winter months work out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alistair, I mean, this is potentially going to hit the hospitality sector the most. I mean, the prospect of 500,000 jobs being lost over the winter, and so many businesses. I mean, the prospect of over possibly 10,000 hospitality businesses closing, plus a lot more linked to the supply chain as well, that is linked to the hospitality industry. And that's why I've entitled this programme, what is the truth behind the rising apocalyptical energy prices, I think is a real statement, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, with the whole talk about the hospitality, they've survived-ish, having gone through terrible times during the pandemic and lack of business, and then you just start to get optimistic and start to build up the business again, and then suddenly you're hit with ridiculously high increases, not only in the price of your energy, but also the price of supplies. All of us who shop ever will notice that the price of even the bare essentials have gone up more than they talk about 13.8% or whatever the rate of inflation is at the moment. It's far more than that in every area. And for these guys working in hospitality, how are they going to survive? I mean, I heard a report just earlier this week of a guy who's running a fairly large business where his energy costs were $30,000 a year, which for me is a lot of money. But now he says they're going to go up to $150,000. Now, I mean, that's not an 80% you're talking about. That's like a 300% or 500% increase. How can they possibly survive? Again, I saw an interview with a pub owner or a chain of pubs, and they were saying, well, we can't put our prices up. You know, they did the comparison. If a pint of beer, I don't know what they charge now, it's about £5 a pint. They said,
It's in London.
Yeah, okay, around about. But they said for it to cover the increase in the cost of energy, that pint should now cost £14.59. Now, that's obviously no one can do that because no one can come in and buy it. So it's a huge struggle for everybody. Yes, the consumer, us as join the club of the pensioners, by the way.
Congratulations.
You've got a long
I'm not
way
there
to
yet.
No. Don't rub it in, come on. But it's going to be a tough time, and for me, you know, we just need to continue to pray and try to be encouragers of others, because there's going to be people down our streets who don't know don't know the Lord, don't know eternity, and they're going to struggle possibly even more than we might struggle. But we've got to be offering hope in the midst of it. But the reality is, this next 6 months, next year possibly, are going to be the toughest we've faced in my lifetime, and in my lifetime slightly longer than yours.
Yeah. And Robin, according to Kate Nichols, who's quoted in the Sunday Times article in the business section, she's the chief executive of the lobby group, UK Hospitality. She warned that 10,000 businesses could be shut permanently in the next 18 months, which could result in the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs. And said of these workers, between 300,000 and 350,000 are employed in hospitality, with a further 200,000 in the supply chain dependent on hospitality for their income. I've also warned that the soaring energy bills threaten to force hotels to close for winter, pubs to slash their opening hours, and factories to shut. Now, I was too young to remember the winter of discontent in the 70s, but this seems that we are heading into a scenario that is far worse than the winter of discontent. The potentially to make hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people go into bankruptcy. Not only that, but also to go into poverty and having businesses being closed. And also then the direct effect this will have on our food supply as well. So what are your thoughts on this very dangerous period that we're heading into? Because there is even talk now that next year in 2023, the energy prices could soar above for each household, £7,000 a year. And who's got that sort of money to pay for electricity and fuel?
Nobody's got that sort of money. I mean, not even with the most stringent, I'm talking about normal, everyday people, not, multi-millionaires or those who are really up in that bracket. The normal working person, man and woman, families together, no one has that sort of money. They don't. And even with the most stringent cost cutting, which some would find, I suspect, really hard because they've got used to a very, in comparison, say, even to our parents, luxurious lifestyle, holidays abroad, going out to pub restaurants to eat more often than actually cooking at home. It is going to create a major rethink on how all of us live our lives in the coming months. And I think part of the problem that we don't think about, at least I don't that much, is that we have become dependent on this supply chain.
Yes.
So the supermarkets don't hold more than maybe a couple, 2-3 days stock of most things. They're dependent on the articulated lorries turning up every morning, the chill lorries, that then they can replenish the shelves. Well, if the price of fuel gets too high and they've got to cut back on delivery routines, that has a knock-on effect. The farmers are struggling with fuel to keep their machinery going. And we've had, for most of us, a very long, hot summer, which we know actually is already affecting the crops that are coming in at this time of the year and stuff that's still to come in. So the knock-on and ripple effects of what we're seeing at the moment, as you say, Simon, are going to stretch way into 2023 and possibly beyond. And yet, I think we need to be very careful, because we know, and we have seen for the last 2 years, the way the media hype up these problems. So we have to be careful as believers not to necessarily feed into that and make it worse. That's not burying our heads in the sand and saying, it's not true. It is true, but we've got to be very careful that we don't buy into their agenda in moving from one negative crisis to another that just creates this constant climate of fear and worry and desperation in the hearts and minds of many people.
Absolutely, there's a lot of wisdom in that. So thank you for that, Robin. Also, within a few days, we're going to have a new Prime Minister. Very likely it's going to be Liz Truss. Now, there's been a lot of criticism directed at Boris. He went on holiday in August for a couple of weeks, and you're thinking, well, with this massive energy crisis, why have you suddenly gone on holiday? Why have you gone out to visit Zelensky in Ukraine when this is probably the biggest challenge to this government that actually threatens their electoral chances in a couple of years. We have a new Prime Minister coming in a few days' time. And a lot of people are calling back in August that the leadership election should be cancelled or move forward so that the new Prime Minister can deal with this issue. But and there's suggestions that we should renationalise our big energy companies so they become state-owned again. But I don't think that's the answer. So does Liz Truss, in your opinion, have any answers to this massive problem that we're going to face in less than a month's time?
We were talking about this earlier, and Robin and myself, and I really believe this is the poison chalice, isn't it? That no one really wants to lead at this time. So in fairness to Boris Johnson, he's gone through a real tough time for a little while, so you can understand why he'd like to escape from the front line, take a holiday, but it's not good timing. I mean, if he's the leader of the nation, he should be leading. That's one of the most important things, and to be seen to have some positive things to say, but his kind of all his statements are tending to be, well, just have to wait till the new Prime Minister comes and I'm just sitting here. And of course, that's not what people want to hear. People want to hear something positive, something leadership quality. So I do feel for the man. He's gone through a difficult time. He almost, he had a terrible COVID attack during the pandemic, and then to find his popularity wavering rapidly. He still should have been the captain on the ship, steering us and giving some words of encouragement rather than saying, oh, let's leave it for another couple of weeks and there'll be a new leader. That's not the right way to handle things. It's going to be a very tough one for Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak. It's, as you say, it's sounding like it could be Liz. She seems to be the one in the front line at the moment. And I think, she's going to have to learn fast and make some tough decisions. And I hope she must, pray this, guys out there, pray that she's surrounded by wise counsellors, because I'm not sure that was the case in the previous cabinet and government. They didn't seem to be that much wisdom coming to advise the leaders, so decisions were being made really on the cuff. And of course, the popularity that Boris had towards the last few months was really based on the Ukraine war, when he kind of stood up and made decisions which were popular with Ukraine and popular with Zelensky and reasonably popular with the populace here in this nation too. But we need now a real wise leadership and wise counsel around, and people who are looking beyond what we're seeing in the sensationalization, as we've heard, that the media is there. That's what sells newspapers. That's what sells stories, isn't it? Making it sound, giving the worst scenario rather than the best. So yeah, we need to pray for those sort of leadership decisions, that people are doing the right thing. We hear good things coming through from both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss regarding Israel particularly, but I think it's the financial side, the economy side of the nation. And how are you going to help those who are helpless? Because as Robin just said, there's going to be so many people in that bracket. The £7,000, they don't even get that in their pension. So are you saying you're going to pay more than you earn to keep the electrics on?
Yes, it's complete madness.
It's madness.
Robin, is the Conservative government's blaming the Russian invasion in the Ukraine the real cause of our energy crisis and the real reason why energy prices are going up?
I think it's an element in it, Simon. You can't discount that, because it's clear Vladimir Putin is using the gas supply coming from Russia into Europe as leverage to try and make Europe as an entity change its attitude towards him, Russia, and what they have done in the Ukraine. But it's not the whole story, because we have this whole greening of our economy that has been pushed as an agenda, I don't know, last 4 or 5 years in particular, that the Conservative Party, and I'm sure the Labour Party will not be any different if they were in power. So, but then we've got the Conservative government have bought into that and are trying to implement that, and it is now turning out to be, on a practical level, total insanity.
Completely. Alistair, for example, according to the US publication, the Wall Street Journal, they wrote an editorial warning Americans not to follow Britain's pursuit of net zero emissions policy. And this is the real blame for why we're seeing such a huge increase in energy costs. So, our viewers watching should become very angry with our government. We should have been given a referendum. Do we want to pursue renewable energy? But this is what it will cost us. So in fact, because our government, Conservative government under Boris Johnson, has signed up to these UN climate accords, and we had the climate accords in Glasgow last October, this is what the article says. It says, if you think this couldn't happen in America, think again. The underlying cause of Britain's energy misery is its fixation with climate goals, especially the ambition to achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. To meet that goal, Britain has grown hostile to domestic energy exploration, banning shale gas fracking, and slapping windfall profit taxes on North Sea oil and gas producers that would deter investment. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has hurt, but the UK's policies has made its citizens vulnerable to such a global shock. So we see here that this has been a shift in moving towards renewable energies that doesn't work, and now all of us are paying that price. This is, I think, an absolute betrayal of the British people on behalf of our government.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. The problem is I'm not sure referendums are the best solution, because referendums always seem to cause more division, because you've got far right, far left, and some people in the middle going one way or the other. And we've seen that, how much division is caused here in the USA, other places. But there's no doubt. I'm a believer, but I also, the reality is, crises do happen. And I think every government should be preparing and look forward-looking as to how do we recover if a crisis happens, because we can live in this dream world that boom and bust, but we're going to be booming forever. It's never happened. If you look back in economical situations in the last 100 years, you've had situations where there crises happen. I mean, pandemic comes along, Ukraine war comes along. We've had the First World War, we had the Second World War, we've had wars in Korea and Burma and all these sort of things that do happen, and they affect our economy. But so you've got to be prepared for that, and you've got to have some kind of reserve, whether it's gold reserves or whatever it is, that you can help your people. I mean, even Jeremiah talks about that the government has a responsibility to look after its people. That really is, and of course have a heart for the nations as well. But if you're living for today, and unfortunately for the last 40 years of politics that I've known of, people are living for, the politicians are living to win the next election, not necessarily thinking long reach. Even now, when there's talk about, are we going to pass on this economic dire situation to the generation after us, to our grandchildren?
We already have that, haven't we?
We've done it. It happened to us. The Second World War had to be paid by somebody. But
we did have electricity during the Second World War.
Yes, that's true.
And heating.
We didn't have it in 1976, and you can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember that, but yeah. So Robin, do you think this is naivety on behalf of our government, knowing the consequences of pursuing this renewable energy zero net emissions policy, or is this actually deliberate?
Oh, Simon.
I have to ask the question, because that's the most important question.
I don't think it's naivety. No, I don't think it's naivety. I think there is an agenda. I have to say to you, I'm really cautious. The whole area of conspiracy theories, and I make that clear, before I say anything else. But I think, yes, the World Economic Forum has an agenda. And unfortunately, the British government, along with many other worldwide governments, have bought into it and have decided to become part of it. And we are living with the consequences of that. But the difficulty is, Simon, if the UK government had decided not to sign up to any of these accords, it would have been portrayed by the rest of that group as a pariah state. Okay?
Like Trump.
And who wants to be in that category? So whatever the foolishness or the desire to not look out of step with everybody else that influence the decision makers in our government to go along with this, we are now living with the consequences of it. And personally, I not want to sound doom and gloom, but I don't see how we can undo that, because neither of the two major parties are going to go in the opposite direction. They've already bought into it. So even if the Conservatives lose the next election, which is not beyond the bounds of possibility, and Labour comes in, they will pursue exactly the same thing, maybe even stronger. You know, so we're living with the reality of the decisions that our politicians have made. And I think it probably the more important thing for us as believers is to see how can we, as Alistair said early on, represent the Lord Jesus in our local communities who are going to suffer in the months ahead. How can we be salt and light amongst people who are going to really struggle in ways that they never in their wildest imaginations ever dreamed they would have to make those sorts of decisions for themselves and potentially for their children if they've got, if they've got a family. That's the challenge that comes to us. I agree with Alistair. Yes, pray for the government. But I think the more important thing is what can we do locally, even with our neighbours, to help? Because lots of people are going to need it.
Absolutely. And Alistair, if we go and have a very, very cold winter, it's going to be very, very difficult, particularly for old age people that live alone, that feel isolated, and then knowing that they won't be able to put the heating on because it's so expensive. And the vast majority of the British public won't use any heating this winter because the cost will be so high.
Absolutely. And I think as individuals, but also as church leaders or church elders or whatever may be, we need to be very much aware. The Bible talks us about being diligent to know the state of our flock. And that talks about our own people. But I think we need to be more diligent to know the state of the people around us, because I think it's the best possible way to reach into their lives is like Jesus did. He met their needs. He didn't just come and say, follow me and you will live forever. He actually met the needs of people. And I think I heard a report again which really has inspired me, and I'm going back to our own leaders later and say, why don't we do something similar? Because they have decided, it's a church in Bristol or a group of churches in Bristol, to open up their buildings during the week for those who can't afford to, if it's a very cold winter, keep heating on. Heat or eat is the sort of priority choice. Let's open up our buildings and at least offer a cup of coffee, cup of tea, a little bit of a time of chat with those who are desperate. I mean, we have to be wise, that's for sure. I've been reading the scriptures from 1 Samuel 30, King David. He inquired of the Lord. In times where there were difficulties, even when his own people wanted to stone him at Ziklag, he strengthened himself in the Lord, and then he inquired of the Lord. And I think this is going to be very important for us as viewers, as us who are sharing this program, to really ask the Lord what is right. I think the nation, and me personally as well, we've been fed so much information which we are never sure whether it's true or not, because for every bit of information on this side there's an opposition on the other side which is just as strong and forthright with their opinions. And I think we've talked about this on this program before. I think people are cynical about our governments. They have no faith in the government, and that's a big challenge for whoever the new Prime Minister is. Build faith back, start being her name is Trust if she comes in, let's start building trust rather than trust, and start doing the right thing. But for us, let's look around us, and if there's a neighbour down the road who needs a little bit of help, let's be aware of it, invite them in for a hot drink. But church is very challenging. Let's see what we can do in our community more.
I mean, I think Alistair makes a very good point. It seems like our nation is going through a shaking, but it's even worse on the continent of Europe. So if we think we've got it bad, our European neighbours have got it far worse. To me, if I was the new incoming Prime Minister, I would just say, admit that the move towards renewable emissions, this trying to have zero CO2 emissions green policy, to end it and say this is resulting in complete failure. Firstly, the only way that we can build a greener society and nation is through a strong economy. And that means not adopting policies recommended by the World Economic Forum and to stand and govern in the best interest of this country. And that's my biggest concern for our new coming Prime Minister, that she will not govern in the best interest of our nation, but instead will govern to the interests of the World Economic Forums and the global elites and the globalists, which, if she does, will result in electoral catastrophe for her and the Conservative Party.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, even if it's a case of putting some of these measures that they're trying to implement on hold until we weather this storm, this economic storm. Okay, if you want to come back to them after we've hopefully worked our way through this, fine. But just stop it. Stop trying to impose upon the nation this green agenda until we can see the way ahead.
Absolutely. And Alistair, I mean, I think it's as Christians we need to pray. We also know that we can look to Jesus, because in the Gospels he talks about how that we don't need to worry about food, we don't need to worry about clothing, because our Heavenly Father will look after us. And that's the most reassuring thing. And the Bible says, don't worry about tomorrow, because today has enough worries of itself. But I think it's also important to highlight some of the coming disasters, because at least then we are spiritually and even practically prepared for such a crisis.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite scripture passages at the moment is from 1 Corinthians 16 verse 9, which says, Paul writes and says, a good and effective door has been opened to me, but there are adversaries. And I think this is a situation for us as believers. There's a crisis going on, but for us, there is a door of opportunity, and there are adversaries because the natural things are there. But if we keep our eyes on the adversaries, we'll stay at home and do nothing. And I think the challenge for us now is to get out there in the community and not with an agenda which I must get everybody saved. It's just reach those needs, and they will be saved because they will see Christ working in us. We are being his witnesses, not by what we say, but the way we live, but what we do, and that's Acts 1 verse 8, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. We have that opportunity to do in our Jerusalems, be a witness to our neighbors, our communities, even the shopkeepers down the road, the pubs who are struggling. Wouldn't it be great to go into your local pub and say, can I pray for you that things will change around, and in the midst of this dark time.
Stop selling alcohol and start serving orange juice.
Yes, I'll have my orange juice. But wouldn't it be good to just go in there and give them a bit of hope? We are meant to be carrying light of the kingdom and hope to the people.
So Alistair and Robin, thank you so much for being my guests on this week's Politics Today, and I want to thank you so much for watching at home. I think we can reassure us to know that God is sovereign, that he's in control despite the huge rise in energy prices, and the cost of living is going to go through the roof. But we also know that we need to stand firm in him and rest in him. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.